This
Just so,
conference
so I
will now
know,
be recorded.
Thanks so much.
whenever I choose to share a specific program here in GoToMeeting, are you guys seeing my desktop, including the GoToMeeting app, or are you just seeing the program that I'm sharing, which is the
We
PowerPoint
only
this morning?
see the program that you're sharing. So right now we're just looking at your PowerPoint presentation. The
Got
app
it.
cutout is only visible to you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to switch back and forth a few times, and then I'm probably go ahead and just kill Outlook because it keeps interrupting, I think. Okay, so I think that we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like, and Michael, I don't know if there are others called in here that we can't see. I presume everybody who's dialed in via cell phone or directly to GoToMeeting is reflected in the attendees list, 7 of 151 max. Is that right?
It is. Yep, just the 7 of us for now.
Got it. Okay. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. So as has kind of already been articulated a couple of different times and different forums, the overall workload of the ACS Advanced Cooling Subgroup has been sort of subdivided into a few categories. One of them is a cold plate specific category. I suspect there's actually going to be quite a bit of interest in that particular group or that work stream. So as of the time being, I'm kind of taking point on funneling in that work stream and helping to provide a little bit of structure to that and making sure that we make forward progress. But I do suspect that we're probably going to want to bring on additional volunteers to help out with some of that. I think there's probably pretty good opportunity for us to even divide up some of the workflow within the cold plate group itself. There's some pretty big categories in there, and certainly want to make sure that we've got good coverage in all those spaces. But that said, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly run over the agenda here. Not sure, first and foremost, I should have put this at the top of the agenda. I'm not sure if this time slot is good for a lot of people or not. I've got a couple of different options available. What I'll probably do is just send out another follow-up email to the people who are on the ACS mailing list with a couple of different time slots, and we can just do sort of a poll and see which one is most popular or which one's most available. I think that there was a lot of people who had participated in the meetings previously on cold plate that are probably not here right now. So I think that it's possible that this time slot may not be ideal. So we'll revisit that. Okay. So that said, the first thing I want to do is sort of jump back into the scoping document, which is currently being hosted on Google Docs. Obviously, I want to make sure that everybody on the call knows where that link is at, knows how to find it, and has had a good chance to read it. But even if you had it, we're going to talk about it a little more detail, the things that are inside of there. I think that within the current scoping document, there's already a pretty big amount of work. And in order to push out some of the items that we intend to accomplish. So I think there's good opportunity for some, let's call it, additional leaders to sign up if they'd like and take on some of these subdivisions portions where, again, there's a pretty credible amount of activity that needs to happen. And certainly we'll need all the help that we can get to do that, I think. The next one is a little bit of discussion on vocabulary. I've seen a couple of emails passed around where I think we're kind of getting hung up on particularly the definitions for liquid loops, what they mean, where they start and stop, even the definition of cold plate itself, whether or not we're extending that definition to go beyond the traditional definition of a plate attached to a component within a server, and extending that to other parts of the liquid ecosystem. I think we should have a discussion about that. And then the last one, which is probably getting pretty tactical on how we move forward, is having some conversations about where we want to have, let's say, a demarcation of influence on the things that we intend to touch or things that we intend to commonize, sort of across the industry in alignment with the overall ACS objectives. And then make sure that we understand what it would mean to create commonality at each of those demarcation points. So I just saw a note from Dale Sarter. That's a good point. Should have announced myself first. So everyone on the call, I've met a lot of you in the past, but my name is Austin Shelmut, and I'm a platform architect in Dell, working in the Extreme Scale Infrastructure group. We actually have a small enough list of attendees at this point that I don't think it would be a bad thing to kind of just run through and have a brief introduction for everybody on the call before we start digging into it. Is that okay? So Dale, you want to kick us off, and then we can just work our way down the list?
Hi, yeah, my name is Dale Sarger. I'm from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and I work in the area of energy efficiency and data centers.
All right, thank you, Dale.
My name is Jessica Goldbrand, and I work for Intel. I'm a thermal mechanical engineer, and I work on energy efficiency and liquid cooled solutions.
Thank you.
I'm Rick Schlack from Southco. We do a lot of the hardware that holds all this stuff together. So it's kind of where I'm coming from on this one.
This is Rob Curtis. Excuse me. Like Austin, I work at Dell. I'm in our PowerEdge server group, and I'm the thermal architect.
Okay, great. I don't see anybody else on the list, so good group of folks. So, and Dale, it was you and I had exchanged some emails about potentially about making sure that we're aligned on what's in scope and what's out of scope, right, for the cold plate agenda, and then also some need to reestablish vocabulary. And I think that's important as well, so that we're all speaking the same language, and if we can use at least the same terminology within our own group, I think we'll be a whole lot more productive. All right, so with that said, I'm going to see if I can make GoToMeeting jump over to a different app here, and we'll move over to the scoping document. I presume that everybody is now able to see the advanced cooling project charter on my screen.
Yep.
Right. Okay, that sounds good. So with a smaller group like this, I think it's completely okay for sort of a more dialogue type interaction. So feel free to chime in at any point. But otherwise, I'll just keep chugging along here until I hear something different. So first and foremost, there was a lot of good work done here. This document has sort of grown over the last few weeks or even months. I hope that everybody's had a chance to look through it, at least in some way, shape, or form. I think that, so Steve Mills made a good comment here, and I think that this might be something that winds up applying to several of these subcategories. But the overall need for harmonization between the different work streams, I think, is going to be pretty pivotal. Particularly, as one of the key objectives of this effort, in my opinion, is to create specific types of commonality across the data center in terms of how you would go and support different forms of liquid cooling, right? Whether it be cold plate immersion or rear door heat exchanger. So definitely, there are going to be a lot of touch points that need to be consistent across those to have a truly agnostic support ecosystem for those different technologies. So Steve's already called that out in the wetted material list. I think that we could probably say the same thing for, rack to data center quick disconnects, and then also metrology probably also applies to that same harmonization stream. I don't think that the harmonization intent, Steve and I haven't synced up on this. I don't think the intent of having a specific harmonization work stream is necessarily to preclude or to hinder us going down the paths of converging on wetted material lists for each of these groups. I think we just need to work those in each of the independent work streams and then bring them back together and make sure that we create harmonization at the end. Would be kind of my intent. So, so based upon the work stream that we have in front of us, I'm sorry, somebody have something there?
A question. With So is there an harmonization stream going on right now, or will it be created?
So to be completely honest with you, Jessica, I don't know if there is a discrete harmonization effort or if that's something that's intended to occur more at let's say, at the ACS level, right? So we've kind of created some tiered structure here where we've got sort of this rack and power group, and then underneath rack and power group, we've got advanced cooling subgroup, ACS, and then underneath ACS, we've got these sub work streams. The harmonization effort would probably take place at the ACS level rather than at the work stream, is what my expectation would be.
But it most likely it hasn't been set up yet. Dale, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to strongly recommend that we not defer this to another group. I think that there's a lot of unique issues. There's a lot of different materials in these systems that you don't find in a rear door. And in fact, I mean, this has been a real issue with the group that's been meeting over the last year. One of the reasons for that is that a lot of the systems are shipped pre-charged. So they have a glycol solution, which, you know, is different than what would go into a rear, typically that goes into a rear door. I mean, none of our rear doors, at least at LBL, have been pre-charged at the factory with a glycol solution. So, you know, I think there's enough differences between a cold plate system with a CDU and a rear door that the materials list might be similar, but I wouldn't expect them to be exactly the same. There's a lot of use of plastics and other materials, you know, in the heat exchangers and in the tubing and stuff in a cold plate application that you wouldn't find in a rear door.
So that's I think it's a really good point, Dale, and I kind of a good segue into the next part. Let me transition over here to a different slide. So I'm actually going to, and without knowing the rules on sharing material that's copyrighted, I think that I'm going to jump into I'm going to show this with giving credit to who it belongs to, which is right now ASHRAE TC 9.9 committee, which I am part of, and working on the next. We're putting together a liquid cooling white paper, which has some additional guidelines to expand upon what was previously released in the ASHRAE TC 9.9 liquid cooling handbook. But the point that you bring up is extremely important, right? And where we're looking for harmonization, I think, is the places where you'll have a similar liquid interaction with whether it be the rack or the server or the data center, right? To try and find convergence amongst the wetted materials that belong in each of those categories. So, for example, you know, a rear door heat exchanger, the path from the rear door heat exchanger itself back to its CDU may have a unique wetted material chemistry, right? So that part may be unique to a particular rear door heat exchanger, and that may look different than the path from a cold plate back to a CDU for the points that you've already mentioned. But from CDU back to data center, right, those loops probably look very similar, right? So I think we'd want to just define commonality where it exists. In the example of having a CDU, you know, the diagram that I showed at the top, right, which is a CDU-based liquid cooling implementation, what's currently being referred to as the FWS, or facility water supply, our system, is very much the same, in my opinion, for cold plate and for immersion or rear door heat exchanger, right? That path from facility cooling to the CDU. So I think that's an area where we should have a harmonization between wetted material specs and probably a few other things. What do you think about that?
I totally agree that the FWS should be harmonized because in most applications, we're not just going to have one system in a data hall or at least in a data center building. We're going to want to have multiple systems, and we're not going to want to have separate FWSs for, say, a cold plate versus an immersion cooling system versus a rear door. In fact, they may be integrated where the rear door effluent becomes the input or the supply to the cold plate technology. So yeah, I agree that on the FWS side, it needs to be harmonized, but I think on the rack side, I question that.
Yeah, That's why I don't disagree with you, right? I mean, those systems are different in nature and composition, so we just have to understand where it makes sense to commonize, and it's not going to be everywhere. To your point, so yes, I think that one of the key objectives that we should get to very early on is, again, some convergence on defining the loops, right? Whether it be data center to CDU, CDU to rack, rack to chassis, chassis to server, et cetera. I mean, all these demarcation points, right? And again, defining those up front will make it easier and more, objective for us to understand where it makes sense to commonize on things like wet materials. So one thing that I want to kind of talk about just very briefly, right, is obviously ASHRAE has done a lot of work on defining some of these liquid loops already. And I think that they've also done a pretty good job of creating guidelines on how those liquid loops should be administered. In particular, they have rules out there for wetted material. They have rules out there for flow rates, for chemical, water chemistry, et cetera. And all those things, I think, are also pretty relevant to the conversations that we're having here. What would your thoughts be on us basically, I'm going to use the word adopting their nomenclature or terminology for these loops? Is that an agreeable move?
So this is Arch now. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jennifer or Jessica.
Yeah, hi, this is Jessica. I was going to say, yeah, I don't think that we need to go and recreate something. And if we can adopt, if it's ASHRAE that we're adopting, I think that's fine as long as we're doing the same within the different work streams, right? So we at least using common language as well, not only with ASHRAE, but also between the different work streams, right? So that comes back to the harmonization again.
No, that's a good point. I just had a quick question on ASHRAE. I don't know anything about ASHRAE. Are they a standards organization, or are they another body, like another organization? I'm just trying to understand how we work with them, and if we have the authority to work with them and quote them. Just trying to understand what the relationship there is.
Yeah, so Arch, that's a good question. And honestly, I don't know enough about the relationship between the OCP Foundation and how we interface with different regulatory organizations. I wouldn't define ASHRAE as a standards organization. I think that there's not a lot of situations where they create hard and fast rules. I would call them more of a guidance organization. They tend to put forth guidance and best practices and let's say ideal implementation standards, but they're not necessarily a regulatory body, if that makes sense. And maybe somebody else on the call has a better definition than what I do. ASHRAE just in general tends to be a guideline organization, and they're a very well respected guideline organization, to the point where you might also argue that their guidelines become implementation standards, but they're not a regulatory agency unto themselves.
All right.
And I think that's entirely true in the liquid cooling arena, and maybe even the data center arena, but actually not in the data center arena, because they promulgate standards for energy efficiency 90.1 and the one that's unique to data centers. They also publish testing standards. So they don't enforce the standards, but they provide a standard that, say, a local jurisdiction like a state or a city would adopt. So they haven't done that, to my knowledge, in the liquid cooling arena, but they certainly develop standards that are widely utilized throughout industry. And maybe just for Arch's benefit, the acronym stands for the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. So basically, it's the group of engineers that design mechanical systems for buildings.
So the reason I'm asking these questions is that if ASHRAE is a closed organization, meaning you have to become a member of that organization to get access to their standards and to their documents, then we need to understand what that is, because we are an open organization. So everything that we publish is out there in the public. There's no, we publish everything on our wikis. All of our specs are open. And so if there is a membership requirement for ASHRAE, and only their members can get access to their standards, then we have to figure out how to work with them. We ran into this with the PCI SIG group, where it's a closed organization and their specs and their guidelines are not openly public. They're only open to their members, right? So that's the only reason I was asking, is we need to understand what that organization is, and if they're open to opening up their requirements and their guidelines for folks like us and the rest of the world, right? Does that make sense?
That makes sense, Archana. So I think I need to better understand what the engagement requirements look like for OCP into some of these standards bodies, and then maybe we can help navigate the waters a little bit there.
Yeah,
so
I think
certainly we don't want
the only restriction is that we don't have any restrictions. That's the issue. Whenever we publish anything to our wikis or at our forums, they're open to everybody. There's no password or anything required, right? And membership, while it's required to participate and donate, it's not required to get access to any of these documents. So that's my only concern, is if they have a restriction, then we should understand what that restriction is and see how we can work with them. Not to say that we can't, but we'll just have to understand it better. That's all.
Austin, I think the answer to Archana's question is that all ASHRAE documents are available, but they sell them. I mean, they copyright them and they sell them, but it's not a situation like Green Grid where only the members have access to the reports. ASHRAE's documents are all open, but they do copyright them and they do sell them. So, when you reference an ASHRAE standard, if somebody's going to want to use it, they're going to need to sort of buy it in order to know what's in it.
Exactly. And so we just need to understand what that is. And, we can certainly reference it. And if someone wants it, we can put an asterisk at the bottom that these documents are available for sale through www.ashrae.org or whatever, right? That's all I wanted to understand is the parameters to work with. And we, absolutely open to working with them, but I don't want to, if it is copyrighted materials that we're referencing and or, using, as in this chart right here, that's an ASHRAE chart, then we need to get permission from them in order to use it and publish it here in an open document.
That's right. So, yeah, I think Dale summarized it perfectly. And maybe, Archana, just so I understand, if we utilize or let's say align ourselves to using their nomenclature, right? For example, FWS meaning facility water system, right? And then again, we don't necessarily take their diagrams because we can recreate our own diagrams. We're just, again, aligning to the same vocabulary that they use. Would that be a situation where we have to get permission? I wouldn't think so, but
we wouldn't need permission unless those terms are copyrighted terms or trademark terms that are ASHRAE only. So at that point in time, we would have to get their permission to say, hey, we're referencing these terms. But let me look into it a little bit more offline. I don't want to chew up the call here on it. And if you can help me, as well, that would be great. And then we could figure something out. I'm sure we can work something out.
No problem. Yeah. I'll finish some things offline we can chew on, and Dale, I'll include you as well, so we can work that portion. But okay. But for the time being, and Dale, it seems like we're all, as long as there's not some reason that we are otherwise prohibited from doing so, we should probably just try and align ourselves to at least the terms of the vocabulary that ASHRAE implements. These diagrams are ones that, again, we're using in our next draft of the ASHRAE TC 9.9 liquid cooling white paper, but these aren't diagrams I would intend to publish as part of OCP work. To make that clear, I wanted to use them in order for us to have something visual to discuss the differences in the loops. So I think next steps on that one, Archana and Dale, we'll work offline and make sure that we've got the appropriate coverage to do that. But I think as long as we're just using the vocabulary, we should be okay. Okay, so if we're more or less good to go on vocabulary portion of that, Dale, while we're on the topic of vocabulary, you had a couple of thoughts, and I wanted you to bring them to the greater group here with respect to how we were using certain terms in the scoping document for liquid cooling. You want to kind of bring those up here and we can all talk about them together?
Oops, sorry, I had you mute. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my concern was is that different people define cold plate differently, and I thought we wanted to be inclusive. In other words, if there was a heat exchanger configuration between the liquid and the hot components inside a server that didn't involve a cold plate, I would still like to have it included. In my mind, whatever's inside the box is the vendor's responsibility, and what we're interested in is the interface with the vendor. Whether you call it a cold plate that affixes to the CPU, as an example, or in another case they have a plate that attaches to the top of the server and cools the entire surface of the top of the server, and through conduction, convection, and radiation, it cools the components inside the box. And in my mind, that's a form of a cold plate, the type of cold plates that say Azatec or Cool IT cells are other forms of cold plates. And I just wanted to make sure that we're using the definition of cold plate in the broadest sense possible.
So, but by your sense, are you just suggesting that maybe cold plate reflects just an end server cooling solution that is kind of up to the vendor in terms of how it gets implemented once you're within the walls of the server itself? Is that more or less what you're trying to describe?
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, maybe it wouldn't hurt just to clarify so people understand what we're talking about. We can put in parentheses e.g. cold plate. But I'm worried that we don't want to be too restrictive and have, and I'm just wondering could that be a reason why there wasn't more participation in this call? I don't think we're focused on the cold plate. We're focused more on the cooling of IT equipment with liquid, but in the box level, not immersion and not a rear door or in row, but in the box.
Yep, I'm with you. So I guess would you include something that let's again, we all know the industry solutions that are out there right now, something like a isotope or what used to be hardcore compute. I think what are they now? They have a new name, but they're basically like a blade module with a dielectric fluid trapped and encapsulated inside of a single server node. Would you include that in this particular category, or would you include that in more of an immersion type category?
I think that is going to be a different category because the water or the liquid is non-conductive, and I think we have to be careful not to set our box too big. I think that it's very important to have guidelines and if not specifications geared towards the liquid and the wetted material list. And as soon as you go to like another fluid that's not water-based, I think you're in trouble. So yeah, I guess I would say, in the box, water-based cooling rather than the one that you just raised.
So,
but it does get complicated. I mean, I think the point is we need to carefully define that so that people know what is the box that we're drawing for ourselves.
We do, and I'm trying to decide what that broader category should look like without making it too broad, right? Because then I start to think about, well, there's the Liebert XCS or XDS, I forget the acronym, right? That describes where they basically have there's effectively a cold plate, right, that resides between the use space of individual servers, and they pass refrigerant through there to absorb heat from individual components, right? I think they use gap pads and things like that to reach down from their cooling shelves down to the components. I don't want to speak for them. That's just what I recall from several years ago reading. That's technically a cold plate in my book. That's a cold plate. Does that fall underneath this category, or maybe a different name that we should use for this category just be node level cooling or something to describe the things that happen inside of a single server. Again, making immersion more of a rack level implementation. Not that we don't have applications out to the rack, but any thoughts on that one, Dale? You might have to mute it again.
No, I didn't have anything to add. I agree with you.
Oh no. Okay. Well, I'm not sure which part you agreed with. Node level cooling, or maybe we want to call it indirect contact cooling. to describe any kind of a cold plate that might be used, I tend to think of. I think that this is not in alignment with the cold plate vendors, but I tend to think of direct contact cooling to mean the fluid is on top of the part that's dissipating heat, i.e., direct fluid immersion, and cold plate is sort of being indirect contact because you have a
yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the industry call what we're calling cold plate direct contact. I mean, it's metal to metal. But yeah, it's there's definitely not consistency in terms of what but I agree that the plate on top of the server that you referred to, like the refrigerant one, I mean, the vendor calls that a cold plate. So that was exactly the concern that I had, is that, we need to define what we're calling a cold plate. In my mind, again, if that heat exchanger was in the box or integrated with the box and it used water or water-based fluid, I would say that's within our scope.
Yeah, maybe we could differentiate system level cold plate versus component level cold plate or something like that, where we're talking about actually targeting, cooling a particular component within the system, like a CPU or memory or whatever it is, versus trying to cool the surface of a system or something like that. I think that's kind of what it gets down to from what you guys are throwing out there, is that there's some people that call system level things cold plates, whereas I think Austin, you and I maybe think of it as more of a component level cold plate.
Yeah.
And
then the question
that's
becomes,
a good.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Jessica,
yeah. That was one of the questions that I had for Steve and Caleb during the regional meeting in Amsterdam as well, of if we were targeting complete, if I would say complete 100% liquid cooling cold plates within the server, or if we're targeting components, right? Are we targeting mainly CPU and then have air cooling for all other components per se, right? Which is also a solution. And Steve's answer was that his vision of it was that we're targeting basically a hybrid solution of having cold plate on the CPU and everything else air cooled. But I mean, there's nothing that says that we can't change that, right? But just to let you know the discussion that was going on in Amsterdam.
Well,
I think the definition of what we're working here, though, is agnostic to how much of the heat you're trying to capture. It could be a single cold plate, or it could be a network of component level cold plates that captures all of the heat, right? It doesn't really matter. We're not trying to define if the solution is capturing all of the heat, or if it's only going after a few components and other components have to be cooled by by air.
Yep. No, I totally agree. Okay. I totally agree. Okay. As long as the connectors are there, right? Right. It's just of determining of how many of those connectors potentially that you need. Right. Right. So we don't necessarily care what's happening in the box, but I think it's an interesting discussion if you're saying and maybe we're limiting it to of having non-wetted board components, right? To make sure that we're not getting into the territory of more of immersion solutions.
We should probably specifically preclude the immersion in the box type solutions from the scope of this work stream, because again, that complicates significantly the wetted material discussion. To use your words there, like we don't. At some point, I believe that OCP Foundation will want to have a server level liquid cooling solution. That's probably, I'm guessing, I don't know that for certain, but I don't think that that's really what our first step here is. I think our first step here is to, again, treat it more agnostically. We don't really care what's going on inside of the server. We just care about how the server interfaces with the rest of the rack and the CDU and data center, right? So if we can make those portions common and more or less vendor agnostic, so that we could take anybody's liquid cooled server, quote unquote, and put it into a liquid enabled, an OCP compliant liquid enabled rack, and we can plug anybody's liquid server into anybody's rack manifold, into anybody's CDU, into anybody's data center, right? I think that would be the objective. I'm not mistaken. Is that what you guys think as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so I'm gonna kind of articulate that we kind of all just talked about a little bit. I'll put it into kind of reshape the scoping document a little bit, or at least put the proposals up there for us to do that. Put some statements up there about the vocabulary portion, which, you know, whatever is that's important. And then I think that probably between now and next week, what I'll do is put together some additional diagrams that show each of these demarcation points a little more clearly. Diagrams that we can own without necessarily having to question whether or not we're borrowing copyrighted material, and then we can again have a discussion about, okay, if we're deciding that we want anybody's, well, let's keep it easy, monolithic, you know, rack mount monolithic server to be able to plug into anybody's, you know, OCP compliant liquid manifold, right? What are the parameters that need to be defined for that, right? I mean, the easy ones that you talk about, we need to have a commonized, you know, connection, right? What does the physical interface need to look like? Right now, there are a lot of different brands of liquid connections, and they're all, you know, completely dissimilar from each other mechanically, even though they serve similar purposes. So I think that would be a big goal, defining the parameters of that connection and getting, I think if we were able to drive towards a, you know, an OCP spec for the quick disconnect at each of those layers, I think we'd have again, that would be extremely valuable to the industry. And then defining, of course, you know, PQ and flow rate envelopes based upon power for each individual node. So again, you know, if somebody is designing a random liquid-cooled monolithic server plugging into a rack, it effectively assures one that there will be adequate flow and temperature of coolant coming into that box based upon the power that box is designed to dissipate. I think that we can have clear definitions around each one of those points. And I think that would be a pretty good goal. And similarly for rack manifolds, you know, often, again, I've been down this road many times with a bunch of different liquid cooling vendors. When you start making rack level liquid manifolds, they're always different, right? And in fact, not only are they different from each other, but putting one manifold into another rack vendor's rack is very difficult, right? I mean, in most cases, it's a custom manifold for each rack from each vendor, and that's a challenge. So I think that we'd want to solve that and have definitions around what a manifold should look like, and that would drive back commonality in the rack vendors for supporting those manifolds and the liquid cooling vendors for creating commonality. And we should put definitions on what needs to be commonized, right? Is it the physical dimensions of it, or is it a footprint? Is it the attachment mechanisms? Is it the number and type of liquid connections on there? I mean, all those things probably would need to be defined. And I think that those would all be pretty good objectives for us too. And then all of those things obviously have an interplay with, you know, wetted materials and water chemistry and all that, those type of parameters. What do you guys think so far? Is that tracking?
I agree with that. It's you know, of making sure, for example, for the manifold, of having the keep out zone of this is maybe we're, you know, again, as you were saying, of determining what connections should be common, right? And if there needs to be innovation of how the manifold itself is designed, at least coming up with a keep out zone that they have to operate in, right? Of being able to fit into the rack.
Yep, I think so. Okay.
Like Austin.
Yep.
I like this, and what I want to do is on the ACS wiki page, we have a section called Documents, and it's really work in progress. And so what I'd like to do is take some of these things that you are looking for, whether it's the harmonization effort document or some of the other documents that you displayed today, and I'd want to be able to put them on that wiki in terms of work in progress, so that anybody that after this call listens to this call, because it is being recorded, can then go and provide comments and, you know, do whatever, provide input to those documents as well. So if you could send us either the documents or the Google links to where the documents are, and make sure that they're either openly available to anybody that has a link that can edit it, or if you're just looking for comments, that would be great. We can have it there, and people can keep working on it until the next call.
That sounds good. I've been keeping notes on paper here, and so what I was thinking, Archana, is that I would just kind of summarize all this up into a Google Docs and then send you guys the link, and we can
That's possible too, or you can take the agenda and also, we can add it to the recording, and that way people can see the agenda as well, and your notes. Either way, both ways work. The other point that I was going to make is anybody that is not a Google, that doesn't have a Gmail address, sometimes when you come onto these documents, you show up as anonymous. So if you are providing comments, it'd be great if you could put your name after the comments, especially if it shows up as anonymous, because then that way we know who to attribute the comments or the edits to.
Okay.
That's all I had. Thanks.
Sounds good. Okay, so with the group that we have right now, I think that honestly that I need to summarize what we've done so far, and again, start putting together some diagrams for us to review in our next conversation. I don't know that I have anything else on the agenda that we can really dive into today with the time that we have left. Does anybody else have anything with these last 10 minutes they'd like to talk about? We can get some coverage on.
Not really. I just wanted to make sure that I'm looking at what you're sharing here. So as you were saying, Bora, we already discussed the ASHRAE, and if we can use the terminology from that, right? And if we can use their definitions for what IT equipment is, what rack is, what row is, what data center facility is, so we can determine where those interconnects are that we want to focus on, right? Where we want to drive commonality.
That's right. Yep.
As well. So I just wanted to. Awesome. Thank you.
And actually, there was one other item on here, and I'm just going to float it by you guys to see how you all feel. And yes, Guy, I recall that you had some concern on this topic as well. As at some point, I don't think it's this week. I think it's probably during our next meeting. But I would like to start identifying some people who can take up some ownership on some of these subcategories. So we're basically creating tiers upon tiers. It looks like fractals right now, but the reality is, a lot of the categories that we have listed underneath what is currently titled cold plate workstream have a pretty significant burden of effort that goes into each one of them by themselves, right? And I'm gonna take, for example, metrology of heat extraction performance. That one, I think that anybody who's kind of skilled in liquid cooling and engineering at this point could probably take that one on. But it's going to require some work, and probably requires more work from one person to start putting together definitions around what the metrology should look like, and then kind of the larger group to review them. Do you guys agree that we should probably start fishing for people to own some of these subcategories as well?
Yeah, I think so. But if we can set the framework and the definitions clearly, then I think it would be clearer of how big that scope is for each of these different subcategories. So we're not going off and starting doing something that maybe not fit within the boxes that we have. That's all. I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page first.
Yep. Yeah. Before we turn somebody loose to go put their head down and start working.
Yeah.
Okay. Last call for today. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you everybody who did call in, and like I say, I'll send out a follow-up email to try and open up a few other time slots just to see if this one might be at conflict with a lot of other folks, and we can we'll get our next meeting on the calendar. I say that our next meeting is on the calendar. Right now, we're meeting every other Wednesday, and pending some, a lot of people emailing back saying this time slot is bad, then we'll just keep this existing time slot. Otherwise, you'll get an updated invite if we change.
Hey, Austin, I think a helpful thing when you're going to send out an email that would include the minutes, and I know that there's various websites like Archana mentioned, a wiki, that some of us aren't that familiar with in terms of navigating the OCP websites. So if you could include the links in the, in the email that has the minutes, it would save a lot of trouble, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I can send you the link, Austin, and we can go from there. That's not a problem.
Dale, you and I might be in the same boat. I've not messed around with doing stuff in wiki format or Google Docs a whole lot myself, so I'm learning as we go. And absolutely, make sure we put plenty of links out there so everybody has an easy path to get there.
Yeah, Austin, if you'll just share the minutes, the foundation can put together a quick, get to know your subgroup email out to the mailing list that'll have all those links and all that knowledge there. So we'll bring everybody up to speed at the same time.
Sounds great. Hey guys, well, thank you everybody for calling in, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Yep. Thanks, Austin.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.